wee hours of the morning, and finally we called. And anyway, he's been flying so much this year, and he circumnavigated. He went to Japan, and he came back around the backside of the earth, and he's been on a honeymoon that took him all over the place, and now it's just so much travel, so much flying. So this morning, I thought I would share something. It's interesting. When I was at seminary, um, I didn't come in the usual way. I was a physical therapist background, and so that was my experience. And during the summertime, my first class, one of them was a prerequisite class towards getting into seminary. I had a few prerequisites I needed to do, and then there was a regular class. And uh, Fernando Canali, he is the professor, and I'm trying to remember what it's the deep thinkers is what it is. Deep thinking theology. It's like, oh my word, you know. So I have all these guys who come from undergrad, and they're already prepped and primed for this, and I'm like sinking, and I'm like in a boat. It's like, he was a wonderful teacher, believe me. But he made an interesting statement that always sticks to me. He says, a small mistake in the beginning is a big mistake in the end. Interesting that Thomas Aquinas is the one who is credited for coining that saying. And in theological world and theological terms, if you were to change something about what you would believe, it would have secondary and tertiary ramifications and other things of your faith, and it would take a different shape completely. And so if you make a small mistake as you study the Bible and you start to believe things that don't supported by the Bible, it's going to break down in many other ways as well, was his point. So I thought about that, and I thought about how that would apply not only in the religious world, but on a secular level. Secular level, because our family's in aviation, because my son is an aviator. It reminds me of when Lindbergh flew his first flight across the Atlantic Ocean. The first one to do that, transatlantic flights. It's kind of interesting. So how he did it was dead reckoning, as it was doing dead reckoning flying, where he used the compass that he had and some maps, and he had some sort of information from the people in charge of the weather about winds aloft. That's what he had: a compass, some maps, and a little bit of a weather report on the winds aloft. And with that, he took off. As he took off, he headed towards, you kind of stay towards the landmass as much as you can. You don't just go straight across. Usually you kind of go up across. It's shorter for one, but you got Greenland and stuff like that. And Iceland, you start coming down. So anyway, he went first over Nova Scotia. And as he set his course, when he got to Nova Scotia, he discovered he was 6 miles off course. 6 miles off course, 2 degrees. That's it. He was just 2 degrees off. But already, when he had taken off, he was already 6 miles wide of the marker where he intended to be. Now he had to go another 29 and a half hours. That's after how many hours was he flying? I forget how many hours that was. 4 hours. 4 hours got him 6 miles off. Now he's going to go 29 and a half, almost 30 hours to finish it out. The goal was to land in Paris or close by there. And fortunately, he had made a correction that helped him, and he was a little bit off when he got to France. He had to follow the coast for a while until he found Madame Paris. But it is true, in aviation world, a small mistake in the beginning is a big mistake in the end. Big mistake. Spiritual application also, it's kind of fascinating. That gate, there's the narrow gates, the difficult way. There's a broad way that leads to destruction. Many find their way there. You don't matter. You can miss by a mile and still make it through the broad gate that leads to destruction, right? You can go this way or that. It doesn't really matter. You're going to go there, but to hit the narrow gates, man, you have to be right in there, right in there. It's got to be precise. And the precision is the compass right here. So anyway, taking this point and bringing it back, how does that factor out in real life experience? Well, you think about Lucifer in heaven, his posts next to the throne of God as an archangel, an angel that covers. So he had all the position that, the highest position under God apparently that you could have. He had all the wisdom, all the beauty, didn't equal God's, but as far as intelligent beings that were created, he was up there at the top. And he had all the influence with the angels. He had all this stuff. Wouldn't you be satisfied with that? I don't know about you. I think like David, just to be a doorkeeper of the house of the Lord, that's good enough for me. But not for Lucifer. Being the top wasn't the best as long as there was a God above him. That was just too much for him. So there was a small change, just a small change in his thinking that altered his previously loyal course to God. Just a small change. He became ungrateful. Ungrateful, my sermon title is Ungratefulness and Gratefulness in Light of Eternity. And so he became ungrateful to God for all that he had blessed him with, and he felt like he was due even more. So we notice that there's a story in Luke chapter 17, and there's a story of the 10 lepers. The 10 lepers, as the story goes. There is one of them that's not a Israelite. He's a Samaritan. So 9 are Israelites, or from the tribe of Judah, Jews. And one of them is a foreigner, and he is a Samaritan. And we look at Luke chapter 17, verse 12. It says, then as Jesus entered a certain village, there met him 10 men who were lepers, who stood afar off. And they lifted up their voices and they said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. Disciples cried, it's interesting. Even the disciples did the same thing. When the boat's going down, Lord, don't you care that we perish? Have mercy, So it's the cry of humanity, actually. And I thought Tyler's point was really good. So much of humanity hurting so much that just even a few words of kindness resonates in their heart that somebody actually cares in this world. So here are these 10 men, and if we were lepers, we would be very thankful when Jesus came our way, because to be a leper was to be separated from your family. You can't go into town. You can't go buy food at the market. You live out there, and the way you survive is beg for people to give alms. But you have to announce everywhere you go, unclean, unclean, for people to stay away from you because they didn't want to get the disease called leprosy. So here comes Jesus, a chance to change everything. Life would never be the same if an encounter with Christ, the healer. And so they begged for him, Lord, have mercy on me. Verse 14, and so when he saw them, he said to them, go, show yourselves to the priests. And so it was that as they went, they were cleansed. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned and with a loud voice glorified God. And he fell down on his face at his feet, giving him, Jesus, thanks. And he was a Samaritan. So Jesus answered and said, were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? Were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner? Spiritual takeaway for me. We all have the leprosy of sin. We do. And honestly, we long to be cleansed of its effects on us. We're willing to ask Jesus to heal us and to restore us, and he is willing to do that. It is up to us, though, our response to the healing that he offers. Our response will show the level of gratitude or ingratitude, whether our heart is with God or our heart is with our own selfish carnal nature. So when we look at the 10, 9 of them who were healed, their heart was with their families. And I understand that. And living life, they were more into that than they were into being thankful to God. Have you ever gotten there so much that you get so carried away with your family or your work or your reputation or whatever it is than you do about time with God, listening to his word, communing in prayer, fellowshipping together with fellow like-minded believers on the Sabbath day, taking the Sabbath rest? Have you ever been there? And these 9 were there at that point. They had been healed. They had been miraculously healed, but they did not go back. They did not rush back to their healer to thank him for it. In fact, we never know that they ever went back to Jesus and said thank you. It's called ingratitude. Ingratitude. But there was one with a heart full of gratitude for Jesus, his healer and deliverer, and this Samaritan returned with a loud voice. He was unabashed, praising God, praising Jesus, thanking him because his life, which didn't amount to hardly anything, is hardly worth living. And I think probably a lot of those guys, if they were living in today's modern culture, they would probably, some of them probably commit suicide. So the ostracization of being a leper is so strong. And so the ingratitude to not even come back and say thank you. But here is the pagan. I wouldn't say pagan. He had a different view of God than the Jews did, but he still believed in God. He came back with a loud voice, glorified God, fell down on his face, friends. That's prostrating yourself before somebody. That's worshiping God. That is a form of worship. He fell down on his face and he glorified God, gave him thanks. Back to our story about Lucifer, though. Again, he had everything to be grateful for, but he became corrupted by his reason, the Bible says, by the reason of his beauty. So, corrupted pride kicked in. It is interesting. I don't know. I have to tell you that when I was in physical therapy down in Loma Linda, when I did an internship, I went to Hollywood, and they have Cedars-Sinai down there. It's called the Hospital of the Stars. And I have to tell you that, of course, a lot of the stars, they have different kind of facelifts and all kinds of plastic surgeries, all kinds of stuff to look good. And so it's kind of fascinating that a lot of them become proud about their appearance. It's very important to them. You could probably come up with names real quickly, but who are some of those people who would be like that? So here's Lucifer. He is proud of his beauty. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if you ever look at the different stones that are in the foundation of the New Jerusalem. 12 of them are mentioned. If you ever look at the stones that are on Lucifer, he's adorned with 9 of those stones, not 12. Jesus would be adorned with 12, because it seems as though that the adornment in heaven, that each of those stones has something to do with some sort of moral quality. I could show you how that come to that conclusion another time. But he had 9 of those stones. So he was going to be pretty amazingly adorned with all these beautiful stones. So obviously he's become proud, but by reason of his pride, he became corrupted. He allowed it to go to his head. It's one thing when you have so many things, but you're meek and humble. It's another thing when you let it go to your head. And I have to tell you, one of the least favorite places for me, my son Daniel feels probably the same way, I'm pretty sure, Southern California. It's not everybody's that way, but when you get towards Beverly Hills and stuff like that, there is a lot of pride that can go because of beauty. And the superficial things seem way too important. The real earnest, the heart-to-heart conversations and being equals and not like somebody's the superstar basketball player, or, it's just different. And my son is more than happy to get out of California, to go back to the South, down in Tennessee, where it's much more family kind of culture, much more that way. So there's Lucifer in that way. His ingratitude, because of the ingratitude and his reason being corrupted because of his pride in his beauty, that planted seeds in his heart. Seeds of rebellion, seeds that would ultimately, as it became ripe and produced fruit, would lead to things like he was a murderer from the beginning, the father of lies, right? A liar and the father of lies. So Lucifer, envious of Christ. Christ received the worship of angels. The only thing left for Lucifer was to be elevated to the level of God and receive the worship of angels as well. That's what he longed to receive. Receive the worship like God did. Of course, created beings are never to receive homage. They are never to receive the worship due to God alone. Remember John, when he was on the island of Patmos, had those visions and stuff. The angel came and he knelt down on his face to worship him. The angel said, "Do not do that." Revelation 19, I fell at his feet to worship him. He said, "See that you do not do that. I am a fellow servant of your brethren who have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God. Worship God." Testimony of Jesus is a spirit prophecy. So even angels say, we're not elevated above you to be worshiped in any way. We're fellow servants with you. Fellow servants, egalitarian. Even though they haven't fallen, we have fallen, we should be in the mud compared to them. Fellow servants with you. But Lucifer wanted to worship. So in the third temptation with Jesus in the wilderness, Satan tried to get Jesus to fall by the promise, you can have all the kingdoms of this world. All these, if you just do one thing. Just one thing. The one thing that I wanted in heaven more than anything, from the angels and everything else, but now from you in a position of weakness. Worship me. Worship me, you can have it all. You can have all the world. The dominion of which I have now had because I took it away from Adam, I'll give it to you if you worship me. Well, kind of blasphemous, wasn't it? The God who created him, the God who sustained his very life, asking him to worship the created being. So it wasn't really until Mount Calvary that we see how such a small mistake in the beginning, such as ingratitude, became such a big mistake at the end. At Calvary, we say it. Somebody said, if you give somebody rope long enough, they'll hang themselves. If you give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves. So God gave Lucifer 4,000 years of rope. 4,000 years of rope, enough time for him to show his true colors and to hang his cause. There at Calvary, we see what Lucifer was like. Pride and ingratitude led to the seeds of lies and deception and murder. A whisper campaign began in heaven, right? He won a third of the angels to his side. There was war in heaven. He instigated it, lost, cast out. He was cast to earth. He lied again to Adam and Eve, got them to sin with them. And he brought death and all the pain, suffering, crying, and all these things to us here on earth. All that has taken place, and we are experiencing it all. But that wasn't it. Then when Jesus came, it was to eventually lead to the point where he was responsible for the murder of Christ on the cross. 2,000 years since that time, Satan is going to cause everybody whose name is not written in the Lamb's Book of Life to worship the beast and his image and to receive his mark. Satan is going to compel everybody whose name is not written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And eventually it'll be, we will be killed with a sword, or who don't have the mark of the beast, or we won't be able to buy or sell. That's where Satan is moving the ball to that point. And we're close to that point here in Earth's history. Small mistake in the beginning, once again, leads to a big mistake in the end. And we're getting close to the end, and we're going to be living through that time of seeing the magnitude of that big mistake, that little mistake. The good news is it works the other way too. It works the other way too. Jesus is the King of truth and love. Jesus. When mankind sinned, Jesus stepped in to pay the penalty for our sin, which is death. It wasn't just death. If it was just death, that would have been one thing, but it was all that went through in the process of getting to the point of death. It was the arrest by the soldiers in the garden, the all night and into the morning trial before Annas, and then to Caiaphas, and then back to Annas, then to the Sanhedrin, then to Pilate, then to Herod, then back to Pilate before he was ordered to be crucified. It was a whipping 40-1, the beating of the soldiers, the crowning of thorns, and another 40-1 whipping. It was a carrying of the cross while being faint after the tremendous loss of blood and the lack of water. It was a taunting mob, the crying women, the nails pounded in his hands and his feet, the dropping of the cross into the hole, his separation from his Father. Yet amidst all the suffering, the one who loves us with an everlasting love expressed concern for the judgments that would come upon the nation, upon Jerusalem, because of the rejection of the Messiah. He was the one who prayed that God would forgive the soldiers for what they were doing because they didn't even know what they were doing. He promised the repentant thief that he would be with Jesus in paradise, and he who paid the penalty for the sins of the world. And as the song says, he bowed his head and died, the good Lord. I'd like to suggest another truth as well. A simple decision for Jesus sustained and renewed every day is the biggest win now and in the end. It's going to take you from where you are and get you off the course that leads to death and destruction. And it's going to change your temperament, your personality. It's going to change your life from wickedness to righteousness. A simple decision for Jesus, renewed every day, living for him, is going to be a big change in the curve of your direction, your trajectory. It's going to be upward and onward forever and ever. So there's the growing up into the fullness of the stature of Christ. That is a part of our experience. That is a daily part of the learning curve for us. As the church family ministers their spiritual gifts to one another and to the world. There's the remedy for our Laodicean state, to receive the eye salve that God answers so we can see our true condition and repent. There's the gold of character, a truly godly character, filled with love and hope and faith. There's the white raiment of the righteousness of Christ that we receive by faith. And there is a sitting with Christ on his throne in glory. Again, a right decision for Jesus in the beginning is the biggest victory in the end. So at this time, I'd like to separate for communion. But ask yourself, are you making that small decision every day to recommit your life into Christ's hands? We'll come back here. The men are going to go straight back to the library. The women will go down the hall to the fellowship hall.